the center of the multiverse.
Hi guys, welcome to Multiverse. Today we are going to take a look at Marvel versus DC. So let's get this party started. I mentioned when I started making videos about DC Universe Online how I made a mistake by using a Wolverine character. Basically, I made a mistake by underestimating the cleavage between the Marvel fans and the DC fans. We'll take a bit of a look at a bit of a history of the Marvel versus DC rivalry in order to be able to explain what I really mean by that. But for those of you who want basically the short version, when I started making videos about DC Universe Online, I would get messages either in the comment section or on the forums about how do I dare to make Marvel characters in the DC game. It happened even recently. Someone even mentioned how if you made a Marvel character in the DC Universe Online, you should get banned. So sadly, there is quite a cleavage between the Marvel fan base and the DC fan base, which is something that wasn't always quite true. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. I'm not really a Marvel fan or a DC fan. I am a comic book fan or a superhero fan, depending on how you want to look at it. I started reading Marvel comics. I guess I was a Marvel zombie by default when I was younger because, as you can tell, I have a pretty thick accent because the language of the English, not my first language. So when I was a kid, I would read translations of comics, and at the time, the comics that were mostly translated in my neck of the woods were Marvel comics. Although we would get some comics, Batman comics and Superman comics from Belgium, the comics that were actually translated where I am were mostly Marvel comics. There was this company called Héritage who were doing a pretty good job translating some Marvel comics, and it was black and white comics at the way back when. Think of if you guys saw a few years ago, Marvel had these essential comics in black and white. So it was pretty much similar to the comics we had, but we had them in single issues, same as the original comics. But eventually, Héritage started translating even other comics than Marvel comics, like The Flash, Karate Kid, Wonder Woman. And somewhat later, they finally started translating Superman and Batman, and the Teen Titans, the Legion of Superheroes. I have great memories reading the Great Darkness saga way back when. So slowly I started reading more and more DC comics as time went by. And I guess I truly became a DC fan when I read Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's the one comic that really opened my eyes to the richness of the history of DC Comics, if it makes sense. Which is a bit ironic since it is pretty much also the comic where they got rid of a lot of their history to try to streamline their universe. Which I can understand the reasoning behind that, but personally I have to believe that it was a bit of a mistake. But anyway, so I'm not really a Marvel fan or a DC fan, but throughout the years, I have to admit, like in the 70s, obviously I was mostly reading Marvel comics because that's what was being translated where I was. Poor crypto. But in the 80s, especially towards the mid 80s, the mid to late 80s, we had some awesome DC comics, so it was hard not to be a fan, maybe a little bit more of DC than Marvel at the time. DC had Crisis on Infinite Earths, they had Man of Steel by John Byrne, they had Watchmen, they had the Dark Knight Returns, they had the old Vertigo line and Sandman that was starting at the time. They also had Swamp Thing, which was critically acclaimed, although personally I couldn't get into it. I tried to read it, and I just didn't like it. And then when we moved on to the 90s with the rise of Image, comic became different, let's say. For some reason, even though Marvel and DC had a lot of success on their own, they somehow were trying very hard to be Image at some point, which was a bit weird, but what can you do? It's something that often happens, sadly. Companies that sometimes have a lot of success try very hard to become someone else, hoping to increase their audience somehow. And today, a lot of people have let's say, a bad opinion or a bad memory from the 90s, and they seem to forget that in the 90s we still got a lot of awesome comics, whether from Marvel and DC. On DC's front, we got Kingdom Come, we got Preacher, we got quite a few good comics, because somehow people keep on remembering only the quote-unquote bad stuff, or the what is pretty much labeled the extreme comics, which were pretty much inspired by what Image were doing at the time. And on Marvel's side, we had Marvels, again by Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek. We had The Avengers by Busiek and George Perez. Holy crap, that was a master run. Although that one was more toward the end of the 90s, but still, it was in the 90s. So we had some awesome comics in the 90s, but somehow people forgot about that. But again, in the 90s, it was easy to be as much a fan of Marvel as a fan of DC. And then in the early 2000s, there was a shift. Basically, when Joe Q became editor-in-chief at Marvel, he started pushing to almost turn mainstream comics into independent comics somehow. And in retrospect, seeing today's comics, the progression that comics have made, I guess it was the early signs of Marvel pushing to be more diverse, if it makes sense. Which is something that right now is, I guess, the very in fashion. Everyone is trying very hard to be diverse, whether Hollywood or Marvel Comics, even DC Comics, or even the Marvel movies. We'll talk about the movies in just a minute. But when Joe Quesada started editing at Marvel, things changed. And the rivalry between Marvel and DC, there was always a rivalry between the Marvel and DC, but it was a friendly one, if it makes sense. But when Joe Q started being editor-in-chief, the rivalry became not so friendly all of a sudden. From a few interviews, we could tell that Joe Quesada was trying to create a little bit of controversy to try to boost sales somehow. But still, early on, he was able to do something that people had been waiting for 20 years at that point. He was able to finally get George Perez to do the comic JLA versus Avengers, or Avengers versus JLA, depending on which issue it was. And it was a masterful comic. Basically, in the 80s, there was supposed to be a JLA Avengers comic, but after George Perez drew 20-something pages, the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time somehow hadn't approved the script or didn't agree. Like, he started making the comic, drawing the comic before the script was approved by everyone. And then Jim Shooter, from what I recall, didn't like the script and asked for a whole bunch of changes. And eventually, the project pretty much ended up being shelved. But luckily enough, in the early 2000s, the one good thing I can say about Joe Quesada is that he finally gave us Justice League Avengers, which was or JLA Avengers, which was an awesome comic. But sadly, as time went by, the rivalry between Marvel and DC became not so friendly, and somehow at some point having any more crossovers like Justice League Avengers became impossible because DC no longer wanted to collaborate with Marvel. It was no longer just a friendly rivalry. It was a little bit more than that. So at some point in the 2000s, I was reading less and less Marvel comics, and I would try to get my superhero fix elsewhere. So, and luckily in the late 90s, we got a few movies that got pretty popular. We got the Blade movie, and then a bit later we got Spider-Man and the X-Men movie, and finally we had some awesome superhero movies on the big screen. So even though at the time we couldn't really get our fix, like if you wanted to have your adventure, action, excitement fix from comics, wasn't really an option in Marvel Comics at the time. They were making what was pretty much known as a dramedy, where they were more focusing on drama. Like the great formula about comics was that it was pretty much like 80% action adventures, and maybe 10-20% drama. But sadly, in the early 2000s, that all changed. It became like a 50% drama, 50% comedy, and you didn't have any action anymore, or not so much. So I guess you could say during the 2000s, I was more of a DC fan. We had some awesome DC comics. We had DC The New Frontier by Darwin Cook, the late Darwin Cook, which was awesome. It was I can't find the words to describe how good that comic was. If you never got the chance to read it, go to the nearest comic book store and try to find it and read it. It's an awesome piece of work. But also we got some awesome comics like the Green Lantern, Sinestro Corps War. That Rebirth pretty much brought Green Lantern back in prominence, and the Green Lantern Sinestro War pretty much brought Green Lantern into almost Batman level of popularity, which is what led, I suppose, to the Green Lantern movie. If you're wondering why they made a Green Lantern movie, that's probably why. They reinvented Green Lantern, and they made it one of the best comic at DC at the time, or one of the best comic at the time. So much so that when they had the New 52, pretty much the two comics that they did not change with the New 52 were Batman and Green Lantern. They pretty much changed everyone else, but they kept Batman and Green Lantern pretty much the same, which is a bit weird. It was like seeing history repeat itself, because when we had Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 80s, they did something similar. They kept they changed Superman, they changed Wonder Woman, but they pretty much kept Batman pretty much the same way he always was. I guess the idea was let's take the opportunity to change to try to fix what is less popular, but what is already popular, what is already working, let's not fix that. Let's not fix what is not broken. So they tried to do the same with the New 52. They tried to keep Batman and Green Lantern pretty much the same, but sadly, the New 52 pretty much became the jumping off point when it comes to DC Comics. In the term for Marvel, most of the 2000 were pretty much a jumping off point for an old reader like me. But the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess, the comic that finally did it, was Spider-Man One More Day. When One More Day was before One More Day, I was buying a Marvel comic once in a while, but mostly I would buy older comics. I would buy old essential comics from the 80s or the 70s. I would buy omnibuses from the 80s or 70s. But when One More Day was released, holy crap, I wouldn't buy any more new Marvel comics. I mostly bought some of the older stuff. With the New 52, I tried some of the New 52 comics at the time, but I really didn't enjoy them. The one comic I really enjoyed was OMAC. Homac represented what is fun about comic. I'll always remember when the character transforms, he goes Omactivate, and then it turns into OMAC. That was a cool bit, and that pretty much resumed the comic in one word: Omactivate. If you think it's a cool code name or a cool catchphrase to transform, then you would have enjoyed the comic. If you think it's silly and stupid, then odds are you would have been like most people and not enjoy it. And sadly, not a lot of people like me seems to have enjoyed it, because the comic was pretty much cancelled after 8 issue, I think, which was sad. But what can you do? It happens. So with the New 52, sadly they lost me as a reader, and we know now that they lost a lot of old time reader, and they did not gain a lot of new readers. So sadly, at first they sold a lot of comics, but it quickly went down, and very quickly they realized that the new readers that were hoping to gain, it didn't happen. So they tried to backtrack with Rebirth, but sadly Rebirth was more of the same. Like, yeah, they were trying to bring back some of the older characters. They were trying to bring back the classic Superman, as opposed to the New 52 Superman. They were trying to bring back, they brought back Wally West, which ironically enough, they messed up not too long ago. And they were supposed to bring back also the Justice Society of America. It was teased way back when, and somehow it still didn't happen. From what I understand, they're waiting for the comic Doomsday Clock to be finished before bringing back the JSA or something like that. And Doomsday Clock has been taking forever to be released. It keeps on being late and later. So I'm not sure if we'll ever see the Justice Society again at this rate. So with Rebirth, they're trying to undo a lot of the harm they did with the New 52. But the sad part, or the biggest issue, is that even if they're trying to bring back some of the stuff they got rid of, even if they brought back the classic Superman, even if they eventually bring back the Justice Society of America, it's still by the same people who gave us the New 52. It's still by the same people who decided to get rid of the older readers. It's still by the same creative team who did some not so good stories during the New 52. So why does it matter if they make Rebirth? It's still the same people behind those comics. So sadly, the New 52 pretty much became the jumping off point for comics. But the rivalry between Marvel and DC goes deeper than that. Again, it happened in the movies. Eons ago, DC pretty much had the better movies. They had the Superman movies, even the last one, the Quest for Peace, which a lot of people see as a bad film. Even a bad Superman film with Christopher Reeve is still pretty awesome. Christopher Reeve personified Superman. He was pretty much perfect to play Superman. The only regret I have is that they didn't make more movies with him. So we had the Christopher Reeve Superman, we had the Tim Burton Batman, at least for 2 movies. And the Tim Burton Batman changed a lot of things. So in the 90s, Marvel sadly weren't producing very, very good movies. But DC were batting for 1,000 almost. But then we got the 90s with the Schumacher Batman, which sadly pretty much killed the franchise short term. Like it pretty much ended the quote unquote Tim Burton Batman era. And then DC had to wait, I think it was like 8 years before rebooting Batman with the Christopher Nolan Batman. But in the 90s, we got Blade. Holy crap, that was quite something. And Blade was awesome on 2 fronts. It was awesome for a comic fan. It was awesome to finally see Blade on the big screen. Yeah, it was different a bit from the Blade from the comic, but the essence of the character was still there. And Wesley Snipes did an awesome job playing Blade. So it was hard not to be a Blade fan at the time. Although, in retrospect, people are trying very, very hard to forget that Blade was the first really successful Marvel movie. Somehow they tried to give the credit to X-Men or Spider-Man, but Blade was their first. Blade showed everyone, especially the producers, that holy crap, you can make a superhero movie, treat it somewhat seriously, and it's gonna work. And it also led to the aesthetic we saw a bit later, like pretty much around the same time as Blade, we had The Matrix with the black leather outfit, and we had Blade with the black leather outfit. So you can be sure that when Fox made the X-Men, they followed in the same trend. They still went with the black leather outfit as opposed to the colorful costume that some of us would have hoped for. And people kept on saying how a black colorful outfit cannot work in a movie or something like that. But then we got Spider-Man that had a pretty accurate costume compared to the comic, and it was one of the biggest hits ever at the time. And the costume was very faithful to the comic. Sure, they had tweaks here and there, but at that point, other than maybe Superman with Christopher Reeve, the Spider-Man costume, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man costume, was about as faithful as you could get. So in the late 90s, early 2000, we were starting to get some pretty good superhero movies. So ironically enough, even though the comics weren't, let's say, were getting not so good at the time, we could turn to the movies to get our Marvel fix if we wanted to. And then we got the Iron Man, which pretty much started the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we got the Christopher Nolan Batman more or less around the same time. But somehow the Christopher Nolan Batman, although it was successful with Batman itself, pretty much damaged the whole DC brand in the sense that they got into their heads that they had to be darker, they had to make dark movies in order to be successful, and they didn't realize that dark can kind of work with Batman. Sadly, it doesn't work with Superman. It doesn't work with Shazam. Imagine making a dark Shazam movie, and there can be darkness. Like we had the Shazam movie not too long ago, and there were some dark bits in the movie. But overall, the movie was lighthearted. The character was lighthearted, and that is what DC should be. That Superman is not supposed to be brooding and emo and crying about, oh, why do I have these powers? He should be a beacon of hope, and sadly, DC got into their heads that they had to be dark, so when they made Man of Steel, they made the darkest Man of Steel, the darkest Superman they could possibly think of, and they completely missed the mark. They missed it so much that they had to They had to tell us that the character was supposed to inspire hope. They had to tell us that, oh, his emblem represents hope. The character is supposed to represent hope. But the performance didn't do that at all. The movie, the story didn't do that at all. You had to wonder by the end of the movie why people even looked up to Superman. And they doubled down with Batman versus Superman. They took the wrong lessons from Man of Steel, and also they were bullheaded a bit. They decided to continue in their quote unquote vision, or in the Snyder vision, we could say. So with Batman vs Superman, they doubled down on that, and they almost doubled down on that with Justice League. They tried to course correct at the last minute, and it was a disaster. And it was also a disaster with Suicide Squad, sadly. With Wonder Woman, they had their first genuine hit with the DCEU. Technically, Man of Steel made a lot of money, so from that point of view, you would consider that a hit. But the reception was very poor. The critical reception, not very good. As opposed to Wonder Woman was pretty much their first one that made some money, and that also was critically acclaimed by both the critics and the audience. And then we got Aquaman, which was, holy crap, was this movie fun. It had action, it had adventure, it had everything that a good superhero movie or a good action movie should have. And then we got Shazam, which was a lot of fun, but sadly Shazam wasn't that successful, sadly. So I'm not sure. I'm a bit worried at the message that Warner will get from Shazam. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. But sadly for DC, Marvel started their cinematic universe with Iron Man, and they built from that, and they built on success, which is the main difference between Marvel and DC in the movie department. Is pretty much that. Marvel built on success. They had Iron Man, they had the Hulk. The Hulk wasn't a flop, but it wasn't that successful. But Iron Man was pretty successful. So they built on Iron Man. They built on success. They built their universes, their Marvel universe on a successful. As opposed to DC built their universe, their DCEU on a failure, sadly. They built it on Man of Steel, and when you build something with poor foundation, eventually the house will crumble, and that's pretty much what happened. They had to fix it along the way, and they kind of did with Aquaman and Wonder Woman. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. I think the next DC movie is going to be Wonder Woman 2. So I guess we're gonna have to wait and see what they're going to do with that one. But you can see that pretty much with Aquaman they started, or actually with Justice League they started to course correct, and Aquaman pushed the course correct even further. So we're gonna have to wait and see with Wonder Woman. But sadly, when it comes to movie, Marvel pretty much had the upper hand. They started the MCU, and pretty much all of their movies were successful. Even the least successful MCU movie was still pretty darn good. Like I think Ant-Man is like their least successful one. I know some people will complain about Iron Man 2. Personally, I really enjoyed Iron Man 2, but I understand the complaints. They were trying to cram too much into Iron Man, the Iron Man storyline, instead of having one storyline focusing on Iron Man. They tried to add the Black Widow to introduce her before the Avengers. They tried to have like all those bits and pieces and Easter eggs and storylines mixed together, and it kind of made a bit of a mess of part of the film. But overall, I really enjoyed it. Just seeing Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, that alone was worth it. But the one scene I geeked out was the suitcase suit scene. There's this scene where Iron Man uses where Tony Stark has his suit in a suitcase, and he puts on the suit when the evil Whiplash is trying to kill him. And holy crap, that the whole suitcase suit scene, it was awesome. It actually was awesome as soon as we get the big reveal, the big establishing shot of Morocco. Holy crap, was that awesome. There's also Iron Man 3, which was kind of disappointing. Sadly, it was an Iron Man movie with very little Iron Man. And they tried to have the bait and switch with the Mandarin, which was a piss poor idea, if you ask me. Sadly, there's something we keep on seeing in movies for quite some time. It is subverting expectation, doing something the audience doesn't expect. We've heard that a lot, especially with like movies like The Last Jedi, and holy crap, is it? And Game of Thrones did the same mistake not too long ago, and they have to stop that. They have to stop doing something just because they think it's going to be a surprise. Yes, they can do something that will be a surprise as long as it makes sense within the story, as long as it works within the story that they've already established. If it doesn't make sense, don't do it. But they're so focused on trying to surprise the audience that they lose sight of the end goal, which is to make an entertaining movie. So even the worst Marvel movies in the what is known now, I guess, as the MCU era, was pretty darn good. They made 22 movies, and pretty much all of them were successful. Again, the least successful had to be Ant-Man, and even Ant-Man and the Wasp somehow wasn't that successful. So if your less successful movie is Ant-Man, you're doing pretty darn good. So when it comes to movies, Marvel is pretty much on top of things. And there's one reason that I haven't seen many people talk about. Somehow it went under the radar, or for some reason nobody wants to talk about that. But the main distinction between Marvel and DC in terms of, or Marvel, I should say Marvel and Warner's, it would be tempting to say Disney and Warner's, but it's pretty much Marvel Studios who are running the movies. Disney, yeah, they were bought by Disney, but the Marvel Studios seems to still be doing the same thing they were doing before they were bought by Disney, although that seems to be about to change. But the main distinction between Marvel and Marvel Studios and Warner Brothers is that Marvel Studios were created specifically to make Marvel movies, that were created specifically to make Iron Man movies, Captain America movies, and to create the MCU basically. So that is what they're working towards. That is the end game for them. No pun intended. When it comes to Warner Brothers are in the movie business, not in the superhero movie business. So they want to make other movies. They want to make a truckload of different movies, not just DC movies. DC movies is only like one, maybe two movies for them a year, and I'm not sure if even that much. So they weren't created specifically to make DC movies. Yes, they tried to make DC movies, but at the start of the day, the movie makers at Warner Brothers just want to make movies. They don't want to make specifically superhero movies, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of them thinks it's pretty much beneath them to make those silly superhero movies. So you can tell in the direction that their movie department has taken that there's a lot of infighting behind the scenes at Warner's about how they should make their superhero movies, or if they should even make superhero movies. I'm pretty sure people at Warner would prefer to do The Godfather 5 than to make another. Yeah, I know that The Godfather wasn't made by Warner Brothers, it's a Paramount movie, but you get the idea. I'd rather make an artsy movie or some other kind of movie than making silly superhero movies. Heck, we can tell with the movies that they're making, even the superhero movies. Like they're not trying to make superhero movies; they're making to make artsy superhero movies. If it makes any sense, which might be part of the issue. They just don't get it. But even though Marvel is being a lot more successful than DC in the movie department, there's a few places where DC actually has been more successful, especially on TV. And now let's look into the realm of video games. When it comes to video games, sadly, Marvel has been pretty much absent. We've had DC Universe Online for 10 years. In my opinion, it's one of the greatest games we have right now. But I understand if you're not a DC Universe Online fan, you might disagree a little bit. But there's a reason why I've been playing this game for like 7 years, 8 years now, I forget. This game has pretty much what I'm looking for. The action, I love the action combat in this game. The way the combat works, the way the action works, I love how it works. And also PvP. I never played PvP really before DC Universe Online. And then when I played DC Universe Online, I started playing PvP, and holy crap, I played way too much PvP at some point. But it did help me when I played later on PvP in Destiny. Whatever I learned playing PvP in DC Universe Online was quite helpful in playing PvP in Destiny. So DC Universe Online gave me the tools to be a PvP player, if I can say. but the way the combat works, the action, and also the way you can customize the look of your character, which is also something I'm getting into. But I'll get back to that point in just a minute. But in terms of video games, you had the DC games that were doing really good with not just DC Universe Online, but there was also the Arkham Batman games. They had 4 games, although somehow people still call it the Arkham Trilogy because somehow people didn't enjoy Arkham Origins very much. I know it was made by a different publisher, from what I understand, so I can understand the why people aren't very happy about that. But still, it still is an Arkham game. And there was also Injustice Gods Among Us. That was quite a hit, which is a bit of an issue, I suppose. I guess when they made the DC Universe movies, they thought that because Injustice is a darker take on the DC Universe. You have Superman going evil and becoming a tyrant and a dictator, and I guess again, DC took the wrong message from that. They thought, oh, if we make it darker and we make Superman evil, and we'll be successful in the movies. Not really. The reason why Injustice worked is because it was clearly an Elseworld. It wasn't the main Superman. It was clearly an alternate version of Superman. But but in the movies, it has to be the main Superman. It cannot just be an alternate version of Superman, because we don't. It's been so long since we had a main Superman on the movie universe. Like if we had, let's say we had Man of Steel and half a dozen other Superman movie with the classic version of Superman, and then they decided to give us a different Superman, an Elseworld Superman, where Superman turns evil and rules the world. Yeah, okay, that would work because we had a classic Superman to base a Superman on. But sadly, when they made Man of Steel, it had been years since we had actually it had been decades since we had a good Superman movie. Yeah, we had Superman Returns, which was 10 kinds of terrible, but again, they learned the wrong lessons from Superman Returns. So sadly, Injustice Gods Among Us was an awesome game. The storyline was awesome. Everything was pretty much awesome about it, but it pretty much influenced DC into getting the wrong message or the wrong idea about making their superheroes darker. But when it came to video games or computer games, again, DC was pretty much ahead of the curves compared to Marvel. Marvel had Marvel Heroes, which was not very good, and it ended up being a disaster.
I got a toilet in my house.
They pretty much they should have made a game like DCUO, and they ended up making a game like Diablo, not just Diablo. If they had made it like Diablo 2, maybe I would understand. But they went all the way back and they made it like a game like Diablo 1, which was you have to wonder what they were thinking. Although it had a bit of success for a while, but holy crap, who thought that was a good idea? It was Ultimate Alliance, which came years before that, was much better than Marvel Heroes. I guess Ultimate Alliance would be the one good games we had in the 2000s. But more recently, we had the Spider-Man game, which pretty much when everyone agrees, pretty much everyone sees the new Spider-Man game pretty much on par with the Arkham Knights game. So I guess it is one step in the right direction for Marvel games, I suppose. Although right now they're talking about there's this new Avenger game. The name escapes me right now. There's this new Avenger game that they're starting to announce, and they even showed some footage, some trailer footage. And holy crap, the models look terrible. The character looks puffy. The design are over design, which is sadly something we see in a lot of games. Somehow having a nice slim suit like our friend the Phantom here is a big no-no for pretty much any game designer. They want to have those designs that have way too much detail for no good reason. I understand that they want to have nice textures and stuff like that, so that it doesn't look too plain, but sometimes superhero costumes have been looking plain for a long time. Classic superhero costumes do look plain, and that's okay. But I guess that's part of the issue also. Everyone is trying to move away from the classics, or sometimes even literally destroy the classics. It's as if anything that's classic is being looked down upon, which I find a bit sad, but sadly there seems to be a big tendency that happens, whether it happens in movies, it happens in comics. It certainly happened in comics, and it seems to be happening also in video games, where anything that was classic has to be destroyed, removed, forgotten, erased, and it has to be changed for something cool and new. And anyway, so on the front of video games, again, DC pretty much have been on top. Even though we see a sliver of hope that maybe Marvel will start producing better games, but I guess we're gonna have to wait and see for that. And when it comes to DC Universe Online, DC went pretty much far out of their ways to be able to prevent people from playing classic characters. Nowadays, we can have a pretty darn accurate version of our friend Batman or Superman or any other man you can think of. But for a long time, like, this was about the best option we could have for a Batman character. Let's equip it. For a long time, this was pretty much the better option to be able to have a Batman character. It gave us a nice, somewhat Batman emblem, even though it's technically the Batman Beyond emblem that they reused later on for Batwoman. But it did allow us to have a somewhat good-looking Batman character. Although at the time I didn't know about the Dark Spectre Batsuit in the Watchtower, and I certainly didn't know about the Batwoman t-shirt you could get from the vault. So this is about as close to creating a DC character as I was able to get at the time. Basically I created the Phantom, the Ghost Who Walks. It's the character I've played for the first year and a half that I played DC Universe Online. And for a short while, the Phantom was published by DC Comics in the late 80s, early 90s. There was this awesome series. It only lasted like 13 issues. There was like a 4-issue miniseries, then a 13-issue series, and sadly that was it for the Phantom within the DC. I'm not even sure if he was part of the DC universe, but he was published by DC at the time. So having the Phantom was the closest you could get to having an actual DC character. I guess you could also recreate a good version of Green Arrow at the time, but I didn't really feel like playing Green Arrow, sadly. But ironically enough, you could make a pretty darn good looking Marvel character if you wanted to. You could make various Marvel characters. I know Thor is still a bit tricky to pull off, but you can make a somewhat good-looking Thor. You can make a pretty darn good-looking Spider-Man. You could make a nice-looking Iron Man. Ironically enough, in a DC, I'm trying to come up with a ROM, the Space Knight, or the Moon Knight. I've been meaning to make a Moon Knight video for ages. So basically, you were able to make pretty much any Marvel characters you could, almost. But somehow you could not make DC characters in a DC game. That was a bit weird. But since I'm both a Marvel and a DC fan, and eons ago when I was reading comics, everyone I knew were both Marvel and DC fans. Yeah, there were Marvel zombies, but it was just like a fringe group within a fringe group, if it makes sense. It wasn't. There were a few Marvel fans that were rabid Marvel fans, but it was a tiny fraction. Pretty much everyone I knew read both Marvel and DC. It was a bit silly to be a Marvel zombie, because the same creators who worked at Marvel also worked at DC, and then would come back later to work at Marvel. So if you were a fan, let's say, of John Byrne when he was at Marvel, working on Fantastic Four, X-Men, Captain America, and then he moved on to DC to work on Superman, Action Comics, and I forget what else. It was a bit silly not to still be a John Byrne fan and not to read his work at DC. And then when he went back to Marvel again, well, it still was John Byrne, and then he made the She-Hulk, the West Coast Avengers, and I forget what else. So just being a Marvel fan seemed a bit silly to me, because it's the same creators. Technically, it's the philosophy, the editorial staff might be a bit different and might have somewhat of a different philosophy. I guess DC has always been a bit more conservative compared to Marvel. But at the end of the day, a lot of the creators were the same creators. So Marvel or DC, it was pretty much somewhat of the same. But I didn't realize how divided the fan base was nowadays. I didn't realize the cleavage between the DC fan base and the Marvel fan base. So we've seen the cleavage in the audience in the comics for quite some time now, at least since the early 2000s. But with the movies, it went one step further. you can see that the Marvel fans are really rabid Marvel fans, and they hate the DC movies with a passion. Although, in some cases, I can't really blame them. I was very disappointed when I saw Man of Steel. I couldn't believe that was the direction they decided to take with Superman. And the same with Batman versus Superman. And you can tell, we can see that there was an audience that wanted to see Batman and Superman together on the big screen. There really was an audience for that. The first week that the movie was released, we can see that. Sadly, the audience didn't respond too well to what they saw, and the number nosedived afterwards. And we can, even worse, when we got the Justice League, people didn't care about the DC universe, the DC movie universe anymore. And we have the DC fan who hate the Marvel movie. But for the DC fan, they have a harder road to climb, because the critic reaction usually seems to be pretty positive when it comes to the Marvel movies. With the DC movies, it was at the very least divided, or even in some cases it was terrible. I think BVS had like 20% on Rotten Tomato. So in the case of Marvel fan, hating the DC movies is a bit easier, because the critics don't seem to enjoy the DC movies either. So the DC movies don't get really good critical reviews. But for Marvel, usually Marvel gets some pretty good reviews. So for the DC fans to hate on the Marvel movies is a bit more challenging, because the critics seems to be positive for pretty much all the Marvel movies. Although there is Captain Marvel, despite deleting a lot of negative reviews, and even despite they changed how the audience score works, just to try to quote unquote protect that movie, it still ended up with a 55% audience rating. So it's pretty much the worst rated Marvel movie as far as I can tell, and that is despite deleting countless reviews, countless bad reviews to try to boost up the score. So sadly for DC fans, Marvel movies usually get good reviews, so it makes it a bit harder for them to hate on those movies and to try to convince everyone else that those movies aren't very good. But there is a clear cleavage in the fan base. And when I started, one of the mistakes that I made when I started making my videos about DC Universe Online was to use the Wolverine. To me, I thought that I came from the background where comic book fans were comic book fans. Comic book fans were both fans of Marvel and DC. So to me, it seemed like a good idea to have the Wolverine within the DC universe. It would allow us to have some awesome crossovers, like Wolverine and Batman fighting back to back against the evil Joker. You would have Wolverine meeting Superman. You would have Wolverine fighting Deathstroke, the Terminator. So to me, it seemed like a good idea to have a Wolverine character. I thought it'd be a crossover dream come true, sort of. Sadly, that wasn't quite the case for everyone. Very early on, I started receiving comments, how dare you have Marvel characters in a DC game? And it came from both Marvel and DC fans. Marvel fans were insulted to have a Marvel characters in an evil DC game. And DC fans were insulted to have an evil Marvel character within a Marvel game. It's sad, but that's all it is. And even before I started making videos, like I was using in DC Universe Online for quite some time, I was using a Magneto First Class character. Like I've mentioned now, I've used the Phantom for about a year and a half when I was playing DC Universe Online. But then eventually I have a group of friends who started playing DC Universe Online. So I thought, let's make a new character so that I could level up at the same time as they did. And we could play missions together and all be pretty much at the same level. So I created a Magneto First Class using mental powers, and that's the character that I've used for quite well. It's still the same character that I'm using right now, but at some point I turned my poor Magneto First Class into my multiverse character. But even way back when I was playing Magneto, often people would send me messages, how dare you play a Marvel character? Or even on the forums, the fact that I was at the time when I'm not sure why we had to re-register on the forums. Like there was the old forums where I was already registered, but somehow DC Universe Online got some new forums, so I had to register again. And when I registered at the time, I was playing my Magneto First Class character. So I thought, yeah, okay, my name on the forums is Magneto First Class, and just just with that name, sometimes I would get messages or tells or in the comments when we would discuss a certain topic. And the fact that I was using the name of an evil Magneto character or an evil Marvel character sometimes pretty much made my comment null and void to some people. Some people will say, you have a Marvel name, your opinion doesn't matter, or something like that. So already way back when I would receive those comments, I should have seen that as a warning sign that using a Wolverine character maybe it wasn't the best idea. But to me, it seemed like a good idea. It seemed like we'll have a crossover between Wolverine and Batman in certain missions. We'll have a crossover between, we'll have a fight between Wolverine and Deathstroke. So to me, that as a comic fan, that was something I thought was a good idea. But then I started receiving messages, as I mentioned, how dare you have a Marvel character in a DC game? But also, some people would even go further. They would say things like, I would never get support from DC Universe Online if I used a Marvel character in my videos. Now, I have to admit, never really thought about that way. Never really thought about getting support from DC Universe Online. A strange misconception that a lot of people have. Some people think that I work for DC Universe Online, or that I'm sponsored by DC Universe Online somehow, which I'm not. I'm just some guy who really loves the game, and I make video about the game. It's pretty much that simple. And I started making videos because of Spittle, basically. It pretty much started with Spittle. Spittle at some point mentioned on the forums, I think, that they were losing a lot of players to the tutorial mission, to the first Brainiac mission. A lot of players would start the first Brainiac mission and quit on the game right there and then at various points in the mission. So I thought, and I can understand, like I have some friends who did just that. They tried the game, and basically when they reached the little robots, there were 3 robots. Well, there were robots at some point that you have to defeat using the counter mechanics. So you had to defeat like 3 robots by blocking, then the 3 robots by block breaking them, and the 3 robots by interrupting them. And unless you did those specific moves, you could not damage the robots. You could not defeat the robots. You really had to use the counter mechanics. They had put that in there so that people could learn the mechanics, the counter mechanics. Sadly, a lot of people saw that as didn't realize that it was supposed to be a mechanic. They thought the game was bugged. They reached that point. They thought that, okay, the game is bugged. I'm not playing with that buggy piece of hardware. And they walked away. But luckily, they made some changes. And even recently, they made even more changes. They made changes that we had been asking for years. For years, we were pretty much asking why there wasn't more DC Universe in a DC Universe game. Like when you started, originally when you started the tutorial mission, you were fighting a whole bunch of pretty much what is generic robots. Yes, they're supposed to be Brainiac robots. Most people don't know the difference. And at the end of the day, it was pretty much a whole bunch of generic Brainiac robots that we were fighting. It wasn't even Brainiac himself. There is the Overseer. I'm not sure if the Overseer was supposed to represent Brainiac or again, just one more robot. But basically, we went through the tutorial, and only at the very end of the tutorial do we finally meet Superman or Lex Luthor for an evil bad guy. And then finally we got our first glimpse, our first bits of DC in the DC universe. Yeah, I know technically Brainiac counts as DC, but you know what I mean. But now they've made the changes we've been asking for a long time. As soon as you start the mission, now you have Superman and Lex Luthor is right there to help you through the mission. And as you go through the mission, you'll meet the Flash, you meet the Green Lantern, and you even see the other 2 mentors. You see Wonder Woman and Batman later on in the mission. And the same with an evil villain. If you're an evil villain, you see Reverse Flash, you see Sinestro, and at the very end of the mission, you see the other 2 mentors, Cersei and the Joker. So, but that is something we had been talking about for a long time, or had been wondering about, like why don't we have more DC characters in that first mission? There was no real reason to be able to do that. I even wrote a long post eons ago where I would describe how come we don't start a mission with let's say Batman, and then we continue in the mission and we see the Teen Titans, and then we continue the mission and we see. So there was they finally did something that a lot of us were asking for a long time, and now it finally makes some sort of sense. Like when a new player starts DC Universe Online, they will experience the DC Universe right from the start, as opposed to having to wait at the very end of the mission, and even then later on in Gotham or Metropolis. So again, early on when I was playing the Wolverine, I would get diverse messages, and I have to admit, never thought about being sponsored or being supported by DC Universe Online. The closest I've had to being supported by DC Universe Online was at some point they featured 2 or 3 of my videos. I forget. They have this web page where you can go and see various videos, and at some point I had 2 or 3 videos on that page. That's the closest I've seen to them supporting me. Usually you'll get a whole bunch of videos from Turikumu, or even their own videos that they have on the that come from the Twitch channel that they have on their YouTube page. But for getting some of my own videos, it only happened 2 or 3 times. I think it happened for the Notorious Time capsules, and once or 2 other times that I forget. But I never really thought DC Universe Online would support me anyway, and I never really thought also. I didn't start making videos thinking it would grow into something bigger. I just made one video. I said I thought, okay, I'll make one video where I played a Brainiac mission to be able to show players how to play that mission, and then it snowballed from there. I made another video and another video and another video, and then here we are, like 3.5 years, almost 4 years later, and I have like almost 1,800 videos. But even today, there's still messages about how dare you have a Marvel character in a DC game, or even very recently someone mentioned like how people who play Marvel characters in a DC game should be banned. So the cleavage in the fan base is still quite present, and is still quite easy to see. Sadly, there's quite a big cleavage in the fan base, and I'm not sure why exactly, but it is something that's happening more and more. And sadly, dividing the fan base is something that seems to be happening more and more. We've seen it, even Marvel. Marvel has divided their fan base between the old school fans and the Phantom fans that they're trying to attract. They're trying to attract a new audience, basically, and they pretty much got rid of their older audience. If you were an older Marvel fan, sadly, Marvel Comics no longer for you. And DC is pretty much going somewhat in the same direction. They tried to backtrack a bit with Rebirth, but you can see that they're still pushing towards that Phantom audience. They seem to believe that there is a better audience out there than the current comic book audience, and they're desperate to go after that audience, even though we had proof and proof and proof again that audience doesn't exist. So at some point I pretty much started making less and less videos with Marvel characters, and I tried to focus more on DC characters. There's also another thing that kind of happens. If I make a video, let's say with the Wolverine, so I make my Wolverine video, and I have, let's say, 100 people watching the video. After 2 minutes, it will drop to 50 people. Within the first few minutes, half the audience will stop watching the video. And then it will slowly go down to 20%, 10%, and then by the end of the video, I'll be lucky if there's maybe 5% of the people, if there's maybe 5 people who are still watching the video. As opposed to if I make, like I remember when I made my first, my third or fourth, I had a Batman video where I made my evil Black Lantern Batman. And I had a video when I fought the evil Bane. I think that was my first successful video. At the time I had 400, 500 views, I forget. And what happened with my evil Black Lantern Batman video is that, let's say 100 people would start watching. After the first few minutes, it would drop to maybe 95 people. But then it would stay to 95 people until the end of the video. So when I made videos with Marvel characters, the audience rating would drop dramatically at the start of the video. It would keep on dropping throughout the video, and at the end of the video it would be very, very low. As opposed to if I made a video about a DC character, especially a popular DC character, like without meaning to, I combined Batman, which was popular, and the evil Black Lanterns, which which were very popular at the time. And when I made them, I added them together with the evil Black Lantern Batman. I somehow had something that people really enjoyed. If I'd been in the mindset of building a big YouTube channel, if I had used, let's say, my business sense, I would have kept on making Black Lantern Batman videos. Black Lantern Batman should have become my main character, and that's the only character I should have used from there on. But that's not really why I was making videos. I was just making videos basically for fun, if it makes any sense. And it may not seem obvious, but it's almost addictive to make those videos. I'm not sure how to properly explain it, but I really enjoy making those videos. But I try to have fun making those videos. Usually I will try to do some of what you guys suggest, but at the end of the day, this isn't my job. I'm not like I'm not like a big YouTuber who earns a living with his YouTube video. This is just something I make for fun. I don't pay my rent, sadly, making DC Universe Online videos. Although who knows, maybe in 5 years I'll have 1 million subscribers and I'll be able to do nothing but make DC Universe Online videos. But we haven't reached that point just yet. But basically it is something that I just do for the fun of it. But I also try not to go out of my way to make something that you guys want to enjoy. I also try to make something that at least some of you guys seems to enjoy. And when you guys have requests, I'll try to make those requests if I can. So I might try to make more. Some of you guys have been requesting that I make more videos with Marvel characters. I'll see what I can do about that. Sadly, what I expect that will happen from that is that I probably will get as many views, or maybe a tiny bit more views. But I suspect that the audience will not stay through the whole video. They'll watch the first 2 minutes and they'll move on to something else. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. So at the end of the day, I guess it will pretty much depend on how you guys respond to those videos. If you guys respond well and those videos actually do well, yeah, I'll keep on making them. But although I'm making those videos mostly just for the fun of it, I also try not to go out of my ways to make videos that no one will want to watch. So I'm trying to have a good balance between having fun, but also having something that you guys enjoy watching. So I'd be curious to see your comments in the comment section down below. Are you guys Marvel fans? Are you guys DC fans? Are you guys both? Let me know in the comment section down below. And also let me know if you want me to focus more on DC characters, like I've been doing for some time, or if you guys want to see more Marvel characters, or a healthy mix of Marvel and DC. You guys let me know. Again, I'm making those videos mostly for the fun of it. It's really enjoyable to make those videos. But also at the end of the day, I'm trying to make videos that you guys will enjoy as well. I try to make videos for the fun of it, but obviously if you guys want to see certain videos, just let me know and I'll see what I can do about making those videos. So that is going to be pretty much it for now, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to ask so in the comment section down below, and I'll see what I can do about answering your questions. So as always, guys, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Poor crypto. So bye-bye.